Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Marcus Papadopoulos, and this is In Good Faith, a show which explores from a Christian perspective critical issues in the world, especially in Europe, North America, and Australasia, the Western world, because it is in the West that Christianity is facing a deadly threat, a threat from the dark forces which rule the Western world. Turning now to this episode, it is a great honor for us to have an American scholar and speaker as our guest. He is a fine man and a most courageous man for reasons we will shortly learn. His recently published book, Defending Dixie's Land: What Every American Should Know About the South and the Civil War, has had a major impact in American society. It is a wonderful example of scholarly excellence using primary source evidence. And I urge people to listen very carefully to each and every word from our American guest in this episode. So, without further ado, let us go to Vermont in New England, where Jeb Smith is waiting for us. Jeb, a warm welcome from me, from the show, and from the mother country.
Thank you, sir, for having me on. It's an honor to be with you today.
It's an honor for us. Jeb, can I first of all ask you to explain to our audience what Dixie is?
Sure. Dixie's a general term used for the South, usually the states that are south of the Mason-Dixon line. It became popular in 1859 with the song Dixie's Land, which became kind of the Confederate national anthem for a time. And so I think that's really where it became popular. I love that song, and it is just a general term for either the old South in the Confederacy.
And how did your interest in the South come about?
It started the military aspects of the Civil War. As I was growing up, I really enjoyed, Stonewall Jackson, Robert E. Lee. I liked that they were defending their homelands against larger armies, and that they kept defeating these armies that were better supplied, better equipped. Massive armies really compared to the South, and they fought with such bravery and courage that really captivated me, especially Stonewall Jackson, because he was so aggressive despite being outnumbered, and he put his trust in God, and that really is what gave him his courage. So that I always admired that. But I was taught a certain way about the Civil War and about American history, and I believed it for years and years and years. And I accidentally ran into a couple authors that really transformed my whole view. And it led me down this road of years of research, as you know, into the original sources and reading authors from different perspectives. And I found how completely misled I was. And that actually ignited my interest, is really, how could I have been so wrong? And why are we being taught this version of history that's demonstratively false? And that is really what kept me going, is I wanted to know why, how deep it goes, and why I was being misled.
As a side question, Jeb, do you believe that you were deliberately misled? Have Americans in general been deliberately misled about the causes for the American Civil War, the 1861 to 1865 war?
Absolutely. I think we've been misled, and I think it's purposeful. I think a lot of things about the Civil War are misled. As I say in my book, the winner writes the history. And I was reading one author that mentioned, had Germany defeated England in World War II and occupied England, what system today would be drastically different than what you learn about Germany in World War II today in England. And so, and everyone would say, oh yeah, that's obvious. And well, the same thing happened in America. The South was really the last resistance to the state and the monopoly that centralized government has. And so they are demonized for that reason and purposely misled so that no one looks at them or sees what they were doing, what they were saying. They just look at them as slave owners and traitors. And that's basically what they want it boiled down to. So no one asks too many questions about the Union before Lincoln came about and so on, and other subjects that are really important but could endanger the powers that be.
The South is also known as the Bible Belt. From a historical perspective, how has this come about?
Yeah, well, originally the colonies were really forms of Christendom in a way. Their constitutions, their charters, they were both the North and the South. We had very devout Christians that founded the colonies and even the states after they ratified the Constitution. And so, but around 1830, the North really started to change. You had massive immigration, industrialization, feminism, urbanization, all these things that really came in and ruptured Northern society, especially in the cities. And so you have this great transformation going on. You have a lot of isms and heretical views, and you have more of the French Revolutionary Enlightenment thinking, especially about the rights of man. In the South, basically just stayed the same. At around 1830, they saw the direction that the North was going, which was more like Unitarian, secular. Other things were coming in and overriding Christian law, and the Bible is now more of a political thing that from the French Revolution that was going to be used to reinterpret the Bible. And so the South in 1830, the churches, the denominations started to split. They started producing their own works. And they just basically started a separatist movement to get those negative influences away. And the South was also agrarian. The patriarchy was very strong. In that, I think, helped keep them conservative, continue the same way generation after generation. The most influential people in the South were the gentlemen theologians. The church leaders were also the main educators, the main writers. They kind of swayed public opinion and culture. They were the intellectuals of the South, and so they had the largest influence in the South, which also kept it more of a biblical society compared to the North.
So, Jeb, is it accurate to say that the North became money-oriented, whereas the South remained true to its heritage, to its culture, to its religion, Christianity?
I think absolutely. That's really what it is. The North modernized, and they wanted to centralize power. The kind of the radicals teamed up with the Republican Party was really a mix of different groups thrown together, and Lincoln only won with 38%. So it's not like you can't say the whole North is one way, but they definitely gained power in the North, and they were fully progressing. They wanted to modernize. They wanted to transform not only the Constitution and the original Union. They wanted to turn it into a nation, but as well, they wanted to get rid of Christianity in a lot of ways. You look at Lincoln, he wrote a pamphlet when he was young arguing against the divinity of Christ and the authority of the Bible. And some of his friends had that destroyed because they knew it'd kill him politically. He never joined a church. They argue, was he a deist? Was he an atheist? I think he was probably some form of deism. But again, it's like this liberal Christianity that took over in the North, that it was no longer the highest authority, that now man's opinions or his feelings or what he thought about certain things could override the order and the hierarchy, which is another thing. The South, they were worried about some of the radical views of equality and egalitarianism that the French Revolution and the Enlightenment even brought over. because they thought it would eventually erode all forms of hierarchy, such as the church or the father over the family, and that women would then become equal with man, and that it would destroy the family. It'd pull all of society apart, because the South really maintained that family kinship. That's something noticeable about them and in agrarian societies. So they saw all of that unraveling in the North, and to them that was, it was an unchristian land. Many of them saw the Civil War as a war between kind of Orthodox traditional Christianity and its enemy, however it could be labeled.
So let me be clear. Abraham Lincoln had little to no love for Christianity.
Right. Well, I mean, I think he enjoyed, I wouldn't say that. I think he enjoyed some of the cultural aspects. He didn't believe in its authority, I guess I'd say. And he never mentioned Jesus. He didn't have, as far as we know, he never accepted Jesus as his Lord or Savior or any of that. He definitely used the Bible, especially in his speeches, to manipulate the Christian population to make it seem like he was Christian. So I definitely think he had an interest in the Bible, of course, because of its effect on America, on our founding, on the country. It was a Christian nation by and large at that time. And so, it's the most read book. I wouldn't say he has no interest, but he didn't accept Jesus as his Lord. He didn't accept the Bible as divine revelation. And so I think that's a very different outlook than the South had at that time.
So in essence, he exploited Christianity for political gain?
Right, yeah.
So, and he was very different, therefore, when compared to the founding fathers.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, and it's just a representative of where the North is going. To think that someone like Lincoln would be elected, at the time of Madison, I don't see it happening. Someone who doesn't regularly go to church, that hasn't declared. A lot of the state constitutions, you had to hold political office, you had to declare Jesus was Lord and that you accepted the authority of the Old and New Testaments. That was a requirement to hold office in most every state. I'm pretty sure here in Vermont, I did the research a few years ago, we're still instructed to obey the Sabbath and go to church. No one does it. None of the politicians are aware it's still in our Vermont secular state constitution, but that's how they were back then. So to think that they'd have a president that never, was never a member of a church, that didn't accept Jesus as Lord, it's just already a radical difference in the North in 1860, in those 80 years or so since the ratification of the Constitution.
That's quite a remarkable revelation. I, for one, am aware of the true nature of Abraham Lincoln, but I didn't know that he exploited Christianity for political gain, that he had very little love of Christianity. And of course, the way he's presented in American society is that he's almost like a god figure.
Right. Oh yeah, he's somewhat like a secular saint in America. He's really kind of the founding. In modern America, he's taught as, in a lot of ways, as the founder of America in any way. Even though we know, the United States had been around, we kind of teach it as if we were always this nation that Lincoln envisioned us to be. And so in that way, he kind of realized what the founders actually meant or should have done in creating this nation. And in that way, I think a lot of people, he's portrayed that way. Well, when he was president, there was a constitutional amendment proposed to add Jesus Christ to the Constitution as the ruler of the nation, and Lincoln shot that down. Meanwhile, you look at the Southern Constitution, they put Almighty God right there in the preamble of the Confederate Constitution. And I think that, that's kind of a look at the directions that the countries are going, where the North is going away from it and the South is moving more towards a Christendom in a way.
Returning to the South, given its pious nature, historically and present day, has this strengthened your own Christian faith?
It does. Anytime I read history or about other individuals, especially ones that were willing to risk their life, that's why martyrs have changed societies early Christianity spread through martyrdom. And so seeing people like we were saying, Stonewall Jackson, and even Robert E. Lee, who didn't die, but Christians who were convicted enough to sacrifice themselves for a cause, and because they believe so deeply that God was on their side, or they were doing the correct thing, it always somewhat inspires me. And to see a society as a whole kind of stand for that. There's a quote in my book, as you know, of a reverend, and he's talking about the rights of the South, and he says, yes, we want to be free of the North, we want to have our own country, but much more so, we want God to reign. And that's, they're saying if the North reigns, it's all these atheistic philosophies that are thrown in, and Christian society is going to unravel, which is exactly what happened. And so to see people take a stand, say, I've had enough, and willing to take a stand for Christ, I always find that edifying.
Now, Dixie's Land, which you wrote and which was published by Shotwell Publishing in 2025. I should tell our audience, though some may already be aware, that I had the honor of reading and reviewing your book. And the review was published by the Abbeville Institute, which is based in Alabama and which exists to preserve and study Southern history and Southern culture. Before we delve more into your book, can you tell us why you published it under a pseudonym?
Right. Yeah, I have 4 children, and 2 of them were homeschooled, 2 were at the local public school at the time. And I did not want them negatively affected by teachers, by friends. I didn't want word getting out that their dad had written a book, defending the South, because the immediate assumption here in Vermont for most all people is that it's, that I'd be racist or something along those lines. And so I didn't want my kids negatively affected. They're now all in a private Christian school. And so now I somewhat regret using the pen name of Isaac C. Bishop, because I have no problems associating it with myself. But at the same time, David Daniels of the National Sons of Confederate Veterans genealogy program that they have went and researched some of my ancestors just a couple of weeks ago. And it turns out that I'm distantly related to a Virginia private named Isaac Bishop, who fought for the South 21st Virginia Company A, I believe it was. But anyway, I'm my next book I'm dedicating to him in part. And so I'm now, proud to keep the Isaac Bishop name, because that's one of my ancestors who fought and defended his state against Lincoln's armies.
At this stage, we should make it very clear to our audience why it was, in a way, a risky affair for you to write such a book, even though you published it under a pseudonym. And it's because Vermont is part of New England, and New England is the political, economic, and cultural heart of the American Empire, of the Yankee Empire. So I can see why, and I think all of us can see why, there were potential dangers involved for someone in New England, not only to have an interest and passion for the South, but then to publish a book which challenges the official narrative about Abraham Lincoln, challenges the official narrative as to the origins of the 1861 to 1865 war, and one which projects the South, its culture and its people in a very positive light. So that is why I said at the start of this interview, you are a courageous man.
Well, thank you, sir. As you know, I think the same of you with some of the things that you say. But yeah, Vermont is definitely almost the heart of New England in a lot of ways, if you're looking at it from somewhat that secular, liberal perspective, where, like you said, it originated in New England, and Vermont is definitely fully on board with what's going on. So in that way, I'm definitely a fish out of water in Vermont. which is a beautiful state. It really is.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Just before we proceed, you mentioned that you recently discovered that you had a relative who was fighting in the Confederate Army.
Mhm.
Does that mean that you are allowed to join an organization? I forget what its name is. Is it Confederate Sons Veterans, something like that?
Sons of Confederate Veterans, which I am about to join. They're pretty lenient. I'm a sixth generation cousin of General John Hunts Morgan, who was a cavalry general from Alabama. He actually was the northernmost Confederate soldier. He went to a raid into Ohio. He was captured and imprisoned. He escaped, and then he died in 1864 in Tennessee. But he's how I have entry into the Sons of Confederate Veterans, which I will be doing shortly. I'm slightly more distant related to Robert E. Lee and Nathan Bedford Forrest, who are arguably the two top generals of the war.
And just now, the Confederate battle flag was on the screen. Can you tell us a little bit more about the flag?
Yeah, I mean, I love that flag. I just did some research in my next book about its origins, and it's really a Christian flag. It comes from St. Andrews, the cross of St. Andrews, in a covenantal flag of some Scottish tribes. And so it's not, this is the battle flag. It wasn't the original government flag, but it has the 13 stars. What many people don't know is that Missouri and Kentucky were officially recognized in the Confederacy and had representation in Richmond, Virginia. And the goal was always to restore sections of those states to the Confederacy after they won independence. So that's why there's 13 stars. Some people get confused by the 11, but yeah, I mean, it's a beautiful flag. It's gotten the name of racism. That came in around 1960. So you had the centennial celebration in America of the Civil War, and everyone has flags. They're waving Confederate flags for the South. They're waving United States flags. There's parades and everything, and no one views this flag as a racist flag at this time. But then the Ku Klux Klan in Mississippi kills a few Chicago students, and it was like worldwide news. Everyone heard about it. And that local Klan, which was in Alabama, some of the pictures had both American flags and Confederate flags in them. And then all of a sudden, all these people who didn't know much about Alabama, didn't travel, saw these flags associated with the Ku Klux Klan, and that's what attached the racist symbol onto this flag. But you look at the older Ku Klux Klan flags, they're all American flags. For the first decades, up until 1950 at least, it's all American flags. I have not seen one Ku Klux Klan image with a Confederate flag. I'm not saying there isn't any. There may be, but all the ones I've seen and from what I've heard, they all use the American flag. So it's not a symbol of racism.
And regarding the Ku Klux Klan, can you tell our audience the original reason as to why it was established?
Right, yeah. I mean, really, there's two Ku Klux Klans. There's the original one that was established during Reconstruction, because the North, you had Northerners that went to the South and they'd raise taxes, or they'd kick these Southerners off their land, and they were left with no way to provide for themselves. They were left with no representation in government. They weren't getting fair representation in court. They were basically, left to die, starve. A lot of them were murdered, had all their property and items stolen. And the Ku Klux Klan was a reaction to the Northern Union League and the abuses that were being imposed on these Southerners. It was an anti-Reconstruction, anti-Republican organization. It was not an anti-Black, even though some of the crimes and things were done against Blacks. It was all targeted against the Reconstruction policies. And so after Reconstruction, the original Ku Klux Klan disperses. It's obsolete. It's gone. It rises again in 1920 in Georgia. And that is the white supremacist Ku Klux Klan that we think of today. That's not the original Klan after the Civil War. And I believe it's Indiana that had the highest members of the Ku Klux Klan. It's a northern and southern thing. But yeah, that's kind of a quick summary of the Ku Klux Klan.
Let me just clarify. the historical context to what you said. So when you refer to the Reconstruction period, you are talking about the period following the North's victory over the South in the 1861 to 1865 war, and that's when the original Ku Klux Klan was formed.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I forget the exact date, but it was soon after Reconstruction and all the crime started happening in the South that they kind of, they had no law on their side, they had no representation, and they kind of banded together almost as military. A lot of them were former Confederate soldiers that had enough, and the only way they could protect themselves was through force, and so that's what they resorted to. Not everything they did obviously was okay, but the overall cause and formation of them, I think it was a reaction to crimes committed against them, where they're just trying to protect their local communities.
Allow me to tell you very quickly about the status of the Confederate battle flag in Britain, Jeb. Whilst it's not illegal to own or display the Confederate battle flag, nonetheless, the police will knock on your door and tell you that the display of the Confederate battle flag has caused someone distress or anxiety. And whilst the police will tell you a crime hasn't been committed, your flag is causing another person anxiety and distress. What do you have to say about that?
I mean, it's scary, first off. It tells you that there's something there that they don't want you to know about the Confederacy, that they see it as a threat. And as you said in one of your presentations that you sent me, the cause of the South is really the same causes as free people everywhere. That's resistance to the modern state that's controlling everyone, that wants full political and economic control and in the thought police. So it's all attached to a greater evil in this world, I think. And that's why I think, many people have described the Confederacy as the last remnants of Christendom. And I don't know if that's true, but they definitely see it as a threat. They see Christianity as a threat to what they want to do, because they want to place themselves in God's place and control everything. And if people hold a higher power other than the government, well, that's a serious threat to them that they need eradicated. And I think the Confederate flag is somewhat a symbol of defiance against modern tyrannical governments like that. And as far as people's feelings getting hurt, I mean, yeah, that's going to happen anywhere. When I see Lincoln, my feelings get hurt. Does that mean you're not going to have any images of him in the textbook or on a wall? Of course, they wouldn't apply it in that situation. That's just merely an excuse for them to try to eradicate something they don't want you to know about, they don't want you to talk about. That's really all it is, I think.
Yes. The first victim of the US federal government was the Confederate States of America. Right. The US federal government honed its skill in cultural genocide in the South. And ever since then, many countries across the world have been victims of the US federal government. They have been colonized, and they have had their cultures subjected to genocide. And I won't digress, but
I'd like to mention something real quick on that, if I could. Yeah. Is that they pretend to want diversity, but they only want this one centralized form of government. And they did it, they eradicated the South, the Native Americans, like you said, and then they go on worldwide and they want everyone under their official system. And they don't really actually want diversity. They want complete control under what they say is acceptable or not.
Or we can say they want a monoculture.
Right, yeah, a monopoly.
Yeah. Okay, now, in regard to your book, Defending Dixie's Land, why did you write it?
Well, as I said earlier, if I've been taught something for years and I believed it and I live my life like it's true, and I find out that that's not true, that upsets me because I've been lied to. I don't like being lied to. I'd rather just tell me the truth and I can go from there. And so the fact that I felt that I was misled, that's purposely misled, that it was for political reasons, all that wants me to, I want to share that with other people. When I became a Christian, it was very hard not to tell other people and not to tell what convinced me of becoming a Christian. In the same way with the South, I see so many people misled that it's like I want to free them. I'm sure you've seen the movie Matrix, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and so it's like that. It's like you want to free people that are having their minds controlled, or at least give them the option. I think most people want to be controlled. They want to be herded along in these groups. They don't really want to think. They want to be told what to think. But at the same time, there's many that do want to escape that. And so that's what I intend to do.
The official narrative in America says that the American Civil War, or as I prefer to call it, the 1861 to 1865 war, or the Southern War for Independence, was about slavery, in that the South wanted to preserve slavery and the North wanted to abolish slavery. To me, that is it is the easiest argument in the official narrative to refute. Would you agree with that?
I don't know if it's the easiest. It's definitely the most common misconception. I mean, I think it's easy to do, but I think there's a lot of things that are easy to overturn, I guess. A lot of the myths about the Civil War. But yeah, I think it's all in the demonization of the South. Again, like if they're slave owners and they're traders, no one will touch them. That's why we teach slavery. I'm not endorsing slavery in any way, but they portray slavery as this vast evil where slaves were underfed, mistreated, raped, beaten, all these things. And so no one's going to want to associate anything with anyone who has owned slaves, and they're not going to trust anything else that they say from that point on. So if you can stick them with that label, everything then in the mind of the reader or whoever's listening, everything's just an excuse for this horrendous sin of slavery. And as far as refuting it, I think, I spend 2 chapters on that. I'm writing a book right now that's solely on that, where I'm digging in even deeper. But to say that the North went to war to end slavery is just not true. No one in the North was looking to end. There were abolitionists, but no political party, Lincoln, the Republicans, no one had intention of ending slavery in the states that already existed. They just wanted to prevent its extension out into the West, which had far more to do with economic and political control, not morality. The North, kind of the states in the North, wouldn't allow blacks into their state. It's not it's not for a fight for freedom as is presented in the textbooks, nor is the reason that the South left due to preserving something that they already had constitutional rights for and protection for. They didn't have to worry about the legalization of slavery. No one at this time was even talking about that. So that is one of the myths of modern times.
And between 4 and 6% of the population in the South owned slaves. Is that correct?
I think it's actually 1.8 according to the 1860 census. That's United States. Yeah, maybe in the South 4.8, but it's definitely a minority that own slaves, as you said, in the South. But even so, again, it's not in any danger. I quote one North Carolinian. He said, no one in the South thought it was in danger. Most of us didn't own slaves, and there was no reason to leave if it was over slavery. The North offered the Corwin Amendment, which would have permanently protected slavery across the United States in the Constitution. It would have made it illegal for the federal government to ever intrude on slavery where it already existed. And that didn't entice the South to stay in the Union, because that's not what they were leaving for.
That 4 or so % of the Southern population owned slaves on its own refutes the argument that the South was fighting for slavery.
Yeah, I mean, I think you look at the Upper South too, especially. That's what no one ever talks about, is the Upper South didn't join with the Cotton States when they left in the original 7 states that secede. It wasn't until Lincoln called for volunteers that they joined. And the vast majority across those upper South states said, we don't want secession. We're not joining the Confederacy. We're loyal to the North and to the Union. And there was actually a breaking of the upper South in the Cotton states at this time. They said, we're not leaving. But they also told Lincoln, you have to allow the South to go, because if you deny them the right to go, we're now a military despotism, that the people are no longer in charge. They don't get to decide their government, which is what the Revolution was about, leaving Great Britain. They said, if you don't allow the South to go, then you're becoming a tyrant, and you're asking us to participate in subjecting free people to a federal government and making them political slaves. And so they had a complete flip in attitude, and that's what drove them out of the Union. It had nothing to do with slavery or tariffs or any of the other issues that were spoken of.
The reason why I personally reject describing the 1861 to 1865 war as a civil war is because the South legally seceded.
Right.
The Confederate States of America was a legitimate, independent, sovereign state. And the United States of America, under Lincoln, invaded. And Jefferson Davis, in his last speech in Washington, D.C., said that we leave not out of choice, but out of necessity. So, Jeb, can you tell our audience why the South left the Union?
Yeah, well, what you're just saying, Alexander Stephens said we left because we had to preserve the Constitution and the Union. They knew the North was this radical, or the Republicans, were a radical party that had no intentions of staying to the strict word of the Constitution. They were going to go outside of the constitutional bounds of what was allowed. In the South was saying, hey, if the federal government goes outside of its clearly written jurisdiction, it's going to become authoritarian. The Constitution is now void because there's nothing that's preventing it from expanding its powers on and on. It makes the Constitution meaningless. And also, you're going to turn us into this one centralized nation where the majority of democracy controls in DC instead of having these decentralized sovereign states. Originally, again, going back to diversity, originally the Union was meant that the states were going to decide all their domestic issues. The federal government was really meant to deal with international and diplomacy and slightly the military. And so the states were supposed to have these diverse political systems, and people could move and go live with like-minded people. And that prevented everyone from forcing their way on others. So Mississippi could do its thing, Vermont could do its thing, and they didn't have to fight. And now once you centralize power, it just turns everything into this huge national political party fight to control each other. Everyone gets upset. No one actually gets self-government, and limited government is completely gone. You've gotten rid of limited government, and you've turned us into as they'd say, an unlimited democracy that the government's just going to expand and expand and expand, which it has. You have to stop the government right away from its first act of overturning the Constitution to taking on an authority that it does not actually have. And Northerners said this as well. As you know, I quote in my book, I think it's John Adams and Noah Webster, that both say you need to nip it in the butt starting out. The first time the federal government tries to go past the Constitution, you have to stop it right there. And that's what the South was doing. That's what states had done, North and South, throughout the whole time up until the Civil War. It was just in 1860, we had a president that was ready to invade states for resisting federal control.
So to be clear, the founding fathers envisaged the Union as a loose union where client states, where the rights of states were paramount, and the founding fathers also strictly prohibited the emergence of a centralized, all-powerful, all-domineering federal government in Washington.
Right, and the people were in power. It's we the people. And so if a state decided, for instance, secession, or that the federal government was no longer its servant, I guess, or its subject, or being useful, it was allowed to leave. We didn't create a nation where the federal government is above the states and it can tell the states what to do and tell the people what to do, which is what Lincoln did. And that's why, that's what pushed the Upper South out, because they're like, you're turning us into a tyranny. You're overthrowing everything the founders fought for, is that the people were above the government, not the government above the people. And so, yeah, that originally we had that decentralized union of sovereign states and not a nation that Lincoln created.
So states' rights was a crucial reason as to why the South seceded.
And yeah, I think states' rights is a terrible term, because it's almost like, selfish, or that the states had some delegated authority and the federal was intruding on it. What states' rights really is that the people are in control, and that a distant majority cannot tell them or impose their ways on them, which would happen in a nation where, for instance, Vermont can, I say this to Vermonters all the time. I'll write some editorials to the local newspaper and I'll say, Texas and Pennsylvania right now are controlling Vermont because they have a wider majority. There is no such thing as self-government in a centralized system. And so states' rights is really just saying that those people in that locality have the right to be governed as they wish, and they get the final decision and the final say in laws. And if it's not in accord with the federal government, they're free to leave or free to go, because they are the highest authority. The government is a servant of them. They are not the servant to the government.
And Jeb, is it also the case that the South seceded in order to preserve Southern culture, in particular Christianity?
Many saw it that way. Yeah, many, especially in the church, many of the generals, many of the soldiers definitely viewed it that way. And I'd say Southern honor is something that comes up a lot, that they were who they were and the North was who they were, and they were okay with the live and let live attitude. But the North and the Republicans were not okay with that. They wanted to eradicate the South. They wanted to overcome them. And so the South was, absolutely preserving its culture, and many saw it as Christianity, or traditional Christianity, Orthodox Christianity, as Southern Christianity, whereas the North was, again, being very radical in modernizing and leaving behind traditional Christianity, and they want no part in that.
Two conflicting cultures then.
Right.
Jeb, we are witnessing at the moment in the Western world an awakening where people are questioning everything that they have ever been told by their government, their media, and educators. To what extent is that the case concerning Americans and the Confederate States of America and the South in general?
Well, I see it more and more, especially the younger generation is willing to question authority, government textbooks and media. And I think part of it is, new people like you in social media, that they're able to get other opinions that they wouldn't have been able to a generation ago. And so it's a great sign to see. And I also think one thing I've noticed, some of the responses I've got from my book, especially people in the North, like, it's caused them to then go on and question some other things that they were told not related to the Civil War. Because I think if you're taught something one way and you're so sure of it, and that authority told you this is absolutely true, you find out it's not. You're like, what else did they lie to me about? And so does it happen with the South in the comparison? It's hard to say. I've had a lot of people in the North that have said, it's completely flipped their understanding of the Civil War, of the South, of American history. How they came about my book, I don't know as much, but obviously there are those that are searching or more willing to hear the Southern perspective of the Civil War, and I think it's just a more common thing in all of society. I hope to see it spread with the Civil War, but again, I think it's this. The South and the Civil War is just one area of what I think is almost a demonic fight that's going on across the world. And so I think you don't have to learn the truth about the Civil War. You can learn it somewhere else, and you can understand and identify the enemy in other areas and lies in other areas that can set you free. But I can't say to it in mass if that's happening. I hope it does.
And how would you respond to someone who describes the South as being comprised of people who are racist, intolerant, backward hillbillies?
Yeah, I think that's a prejudice that's unfounded. I mean, I have limited personal experience. I've been to Virginia and Alabama and Florida. I will be going to Tennessee. But one thing I've noticed, I've talked with coworkers of mine in Vermont who also travel south, and I said the difference is they'll respect you for being a human. You get a certain amount of respect and attention just because you're human. And it seems like you don't get that in Vermont and New England from many people. It's more unless they think you can do something positive for them. If they see value in you, they'll treat you well. In the South, I feel like you're treated well regardless if you offer them anything. And so that's how I describe the difference, North and South, and it applies across race in all social situations. And going back to 1860, as you know, in my book, I quote a lot of Northerners, abolitionists, and Europeans who went south that said there's less racism in the South than there is in the North. And that's one thing, it's in our mind that, oh, they owned slaves, so they must have thought of blacks as less than human. But it's not. As you know, again, I quote Southerners that say these are our brothers. They're 100% human. They're our brothers in Christ. We're not ashamed to call them our brothers. They're flesh of our flesh, bone of our bone. They're the same as we are. And there wasn't this devaluing of different race, even when slavery was a legal system. And in the South, they worked together, they prayed together, they went to church together, they lived together, they slept together. There was more racism in the North just because they didn't see them as much. You know, blacks and whites lived together in the South. They grew up together. They're best friends while growing up on the plantation. They knew each other. And in the North, blacks were really this foreign people. There's a great, if you've seen Ken Burns' Civil War documentary, it's a very popular, you haven't? It's a popular pro-North documentary. And at the end of it, he makes this big deal because Sherman shook the hand of a black person, I think in Philadelphia. And everyone's like, oh, wow, look at this equality, black and white. They're shaking hands. But that happened all the time in the South. The black and white interaction, the handshaking, the hugs, the talking to each other, because they were familiar with each other. They grew up together. It's two cultures that lived together. And in the North, again, they were separate. So there's definitely more racism in the North in 1860. And I'd say today, I don't know, I see the value of humanity more thoroughly in the South that applies to everyone, regardless of race, that you don't get in the North as often.
Now, Jeb, you just referred to General Sherman, who was a Union general and a general who had an infamous reputation. Can you tell us why he had such a bad reputation?
Yeah, I mean, this is not something I've dug into. A lot of others have written about Sherman, but he was of the mindset, he justified his actions going through Georgia and South Carolina because they were disobedient to the federal government. And I talk about how different that mindset is of the two cultures of the South. One in the South says you're meant to be independent. Government is made for you, for your benefit, and you throw it off, like the Declaration of Independence says, and create a new one if because disobedient to the government, you deserve to be massacred, you deserve to be mistreated, to be killed on the battlefield. There, you know, they went through, there was a lot of rapes, there is they stole people's property, they burned down houses, they tortured people, obviously they killed people. There's a lot of crimes, obviously, with Sherman that he's known for, that basically waged war on the civilian population, especially of South Carolina, because they dared disobey the federal government. And that's just tyrannical to me. And it's amazing how many people I've spoken with that had that mindset. I don't know if they'd actually go through and do what Sherman and some of his men did, but they feel his actions are justified simply because South Carolina started the secession movement, or because they were disobedient to the federal government. And it's such a scary thing to me of how the blind obedience that he had and that many Americans today carry.
And if my memory serves me correct, Sherman was Abraham Lincoln's favorite general?
I don't know about that. I don't know. He could have been. I mean, I think he saw Grant as his top guy, as his best general. Whether Sherman was his personal favorite or not, I'm sure he found him very useful, willing to do Grant and Sherman. They weren't that great of generals. Grant was a good general, but he's not what he's made out to be in Sherman. But I think Lincoln found him useful, that they were willing, they weren't like McClellan. McClellan didn't want to just exterminate the South. He wanted a more of a bloodless, quick end to the war, whereas Grant and Sherman were definitely willing to eradicate the South and to punish them as much as needed to bring about victory. And so I'm sure Lincoln loved them for that.
So for Grant and Sherman, the war against the South, the war against the Confederate States of America, was a justified war of extermination?
Right. And Sherman, I quote in my book, did the same thing with the Native Americans. He said, because they're in the way of the transcontinental railroad and in American progress out west, they need to be exterminated. We either need to remake them in the image of the northern capitalists, or we need to exterminate them. And Sherman was willing to do that.
Do you have a favorite southern state?
My father lives in Alabama. He moved there. So I definitely love Alabama because I have family down there. I've been there a few times. I did a talk down there recently that went really well. But Virginia has a special place in my heart because of some of the generals, because of its history, and it's as close as you can get to perfection in our fallen world today, I guess, at least in America.
And you have delivered some speeches in the South pertaining to your book?
Yep. Yeah, I've been to Houston, to Montgomery, Houston, Texas, to the Montgomery area. I'm going to be going to the Shenandoah Valley, which I'm very excited about this summer. And I'm working on one for Tennessee, I think in Nashville. And we'll see what else comes up. Like I said, I have another book coming out, and I hope, kind of promote that one really well and set up some new talks. I've been invited to Louisiana. The problem is getting there. I've been invited to Atlanta as well, and South Carolina. So I'm sure at some point I will make it down there.
And in a few words, what does the South have to offer to the world?
The South is, if we're talking about the Confederacy, I think it has resistance, hope in a lot of ways, to see that people before us have fought the same fight, that we're willing to die for it. So an example, a society that doesn't have to be completely secular, that can maintain Christian values and hearts throughout generations, even if it's a remnant. And so, yeah, I'd say resistance to the erosion of modernity on society.
Jeb, this has been a most intriguing of interviews. All of us at Unprecedented TV in Britain would like to thank you for your presence. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to interview you.
No, thank you. It was an honor. It was great to finally talk with you, and I hope we can communicate in the future as well.
Just before I let you go, how can our viewers find out more about your work?
You can follow me on social media on Facebook or X, Jeb Smith 764 on X. Also, Shotwell Publishing is a great place to go if you're interested in my book. But yeah, I update on Facebook and on X.
I know, Jeb, because we spoke about this recently, that you refer to yourself or describe yourself as an author and a speaker. I personally believe you should add to that historian. And I know that you said you don't have a degree in history, but as I said to you, Herodotus also didn't have a degree in history.
Right.
And your book, Defending Dixie's Land, is based on so much primary source evidence that you have extracted, that you have analyzed, that it warrants you having the title historian. And I truly mean that. And you are far superior to many a historian, certainly in Britain and in America. So I salute you for all of the work you have done. I greatly enjoyed reading your book. Your primary source evidence is breathtaking, and it's not difficult and it's not easy to ascertain primary source evidence and then to put it together and then to base an argument on it. So I believe you've done a fantastic job, not just for America, not just for American history, but for world history, because people need to know the other side to the story regarding the South, the Confederate States of America, the reasons for the 1861 to 1865 war, and the other side to Abraham Lincoln. So again, Jeb, thank you so much for coming on In Good Faith. Thank you so much for coming on Unprecedented TV. And I hope one day you will pay us another visit.
I would love to, sir. And thank you. And one say, I think it's in a way an advantage to not have gone through and got a degree in history, because I think it would have put blinders on me. I think it would have put me on that narrow path that people are kind of ushered along, and not doing that allowed me to just open up my mind and be open to question everything that a lot of people, a lot of assumptions that even some of the Southern writers and historians have. I was able to kind of question everything. So I think in a way that was a benefit.
Once again, Jeb, thank you so much for your time.